guys, it's Libby, and today I'm doing my first warm-up video for the Bard Book Club, in which I'm going to talk about Shakespeare and genre, and yes, I am filming this immediately after the announcement video, hence matching clothes. So in my opinion, there are two different ways to look at how Shakespeare's plays fit into different genres, and they're the easy way and the hard way, or the complex way. It doesn't have to be hard, it's fun. The easy way is to look at the table of contents of the first folio. The first folio divides plays by comedies, histories, and tragedies. And by that definition, the histories are all the plays with the words John, Henry, or Richard in the title. The tragedies are Antony and Cleopatra, Coriolanus, Julius Caesar, Timon of Athens, Titus Andronicus, Macbeth, Othello, King Lear, Hamlet, Romeo and Juliet. Did I miss any? Got them all. And then the comedies are everything else. There are a couple asterisks, that's gotta be right, to this categorization system. One is that Cymbeline is listed with the tragedies, which, like, that's just definitely wrong. Only the bad people die at the end of Cymbeline. Most people categorize it as a romance. And then there are three plays which are now attributed to Shakespeare that were not included in the first folio. The first one is Pericles, which is pretty clearly a romance. The next is Edward III, which is pretty clearly a history. And then there's Two Noble Kinsmen, which is just weird. So if you want to talk about genre as a collection of discrete boxes to put things in, if you want to talk about what genre something really is, you should use that system going by where is it in the first folio. But then there's the complex, the nuanced, the hard system, which is to think about genre as a collection of tropes, character types, attitudes that are all commonly appearing in the same plays. And in this context, we can break the plays down into further categories, and we can also bleed the categories into each other a little bit. So the most common additional category beyond comedy, history, tragedy that you will hear Shakespeare plays get lumped into is the romances. These are a subset of the comedies, which officially include, not officially, but officially include Cymbeline, Pericles, Winter's Tale, and The Tempest. Libby thinks that maybe a little bit or not as you like it, All's Well That Ends Well has like a toe in that box. Romances were all written closer to the end of Shakespeare's career, and they're different from the other comedies, which I call romantic comedies, even though I don't particularly like that term because the other category is romance, but we'll just work with it for now. Romances are a little bit bigger in scope than the romantic comedies. Romantic comedies are generally concerned with one or two or three or four couples getting together, but romances are interested in the unification of an entire family unit. They also have generally a wider geographic scope. So in a romantic comedy, you'll often have one or two settings, like the court and the forest, whereas romances are either peripatetic, we go around, we go to Italy, we go to Wales, we go to England, and the characters tend to be drawn with slightly broader strokes. They're more archetypal. Reading a romance is a bit more like reading a fairy tale, whereas a romantic comedy would read more like a sitcom. So that's one group we can break out of the comedies. Another is city comedies. Now this is a type of comedy that was getting more popular towards the end of Shakespeare's career and continued into the Jacobean period. City comedies, no surprise, take place in a city rather than in some rich person's house or an idyllic pastoral countryside. And city comedy is a reflection of the thoughts people were having surrounding the changing economy as things moved from being agrarian and sort of small markets were small to expanding markets and like proper modern capitalism. So city comedy is often interested in the value of things as well as the value of people. And if we're talking about the value of people, we can talk about whores. There are a lot of whores in city comedy. Shakespeare only wrote one clearly identified city comedy, and that is Measure for Measure, Libby's favorite play. Libby loves the city comedies. However, I would argue that Troilus and Cressida is also a city comedy, and I think that this will help people come to terms with Troilus and Cressida more, because it's a weird little play. It's set in the ancient world as opposed to a contemporary European city, but it is still set in a city, the city of Troy, and there is a literal exchange of persons as though they were goods, and sometimes people will just stop the play to be like, hey, how do I compare in terms of value to this other person? And also, so many whores in that play. Helen's a whore, Patroclus is a whore, Cressida is a whore. Whores, 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 city comedy loves whores. So romantic comedy, city comedy, and romance, that'll do us for the funny ones. For the sad ones, you can break out a group by topic, and that is the Roman plays. You'll sometimes hear people call the collection of plays Titus Andronicus, Julius Caesar, Antony and Cleopatra, and Coriolanus, the Roman plays. You might also think about considering Shakespeare's poem, The Rape of Lucrece, in this group, because it is set in the Roman era. And when you look at these 5 works together, you kind of get the framework of the structure of the history of Rome. So Rape of Lucrece is about the change from a kingdom to a republic. Coriolanus is set at the height of the republic. Julius Caesar and Antony and Cleopatra are about the transfer from republic to empire, and then Titus Andronicus is about the late empire when things get really bad. And there's another subgenre of tragedy that was pretty popular at the time Shakespeare was writing, but is not very extensively reflected in Shakespeare's own works, and that is revenge tragedy. Revenge tragedy is less of this sort of noble suffering that is meant to educate us and, I don't know, make us feel some stuff, and more about the pornographic blood and guts. In revenge tragedies, you get rape, you get mutilation, you get stabbings and poisonings, you get cannibalism, yum yum. You often usually get incest, although Shakespeare didn't write about incest that much, which I'm okay with. Shakespeare's 2 revenge tragedies are Titus Andronicus and Hamlet, although Hamlet is kind of a subversion of a revenge tragedy. But the point of the complex way of looking at Shakespeare and genre is not to just divide things into smaller boxes, but in fact to reject the tyranny of boxes entirely, which is about looking at how any play could be influenced by any genre. So take King Lear, for instance, very sad tragedy, but in the first scene, King Lear is evaluating his daughters based on how much he loves them. He's putting a land value on his children. Very city comedy sort of thing, looking at the value of people. And then this is especially interesting for some of the comedies where you often have an A and a B and sometimes kind of a C plot going on. So for example, in The Merchant of Venice, you've got one plot, which is the conflict between Antonio and Shylock, which is about money and exactly how much of Antonio's body is worth this debt that he owes, which is a very city comedy sort of plot line. And then our other plot is the wooing of Portia by Bassanio, which is it has a lot of the classical elements of a romantic comedy. You are removing to a pastoral idyll, you've got a song, you've got the main lovebirds and also the secondary lovebirds who provide some comic relief. But then you've also got the caskets, a little bit of city comedy injecting itself into our romantic comedy, because Portia's suitors have to evaluate the caskets and figure out which one will contain Portia's picture. And then in Twelfth Night, again, you have 2 plots going on. One of them is the love triangle between Orsino, Viola, and Olivia. And then you've got the trick that's being played on Malvolio by Olivia's other servants. And the first one is a pretty standard romantic comedy, and then the Malvolio plot kind of bothers some people because it's really sad. People are really mean to Malvolio in this, and at the end he is exiled. But you could imagine that if Shakespeare was even a little more willing to break the boundaries of genre, that Malvolio might like kill himself at the end. In fact, one could even imagine where at the end of Twelfth Night, all of our lovebirds have left the stage to go get married and change back into their clothes of their assigned gender, and Malvolio comes back on and commits suicide. Would I direct a production like that? Oh, you know I would. Malvolio's also got this sort of classic fatal flaw thing that you would find in a tragic hero, which I would argue is hypocrisy, but you could also call pride or arrogance or wanting people to like him. What a terrible person. So those are my thoughts on Shakespeare and genre. I hope you guys found this helpful, and I will see you again soon with a video on Shakespeare and verse, and then we move on to Othello.